I was 12 years old the night my parents told the world I had run away. And the truth is, I didn't run anywhere. I was left behind, like something already decided, something inconvenient, something they wanted erased. And if you're listening to this thinking you know where this is going, trust me, you don't, because I didn't know either. Not then, not even 20 years later when a sealed court envelope landed on my desk with their names printed on it and mine listed beneath as guardian. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back, because every story like this needs you to understand the lie before you understand the cost, before you understand why my hands were shaking when I opened that letter and saw the people who buried me alive with rumors now needed me to keep them alive. The hook is simple. My parents abandoned me at 12, told everyone I ran away, and 20 years later, the court appointed me as their guardian. But the truth underneath that sentence is anything but simple. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 42 years old now, and for most of my life, I've lived as a ghost in my own family history. The girl who vanished, the problem child, the one who embarrassed them, the one they said chose the streets over love, over home, over rules. That was the story they told neighbors, teachers, church friends, even the police. And when a lie is repeated by the people who are supposed to protect you, it becomes a kind of truth to everyone else. But the child living inside it, it was a one-sided affair. It was a Thursday when it happened. I remember because Thursdays were spaghetti nights, and my mother always overcooked the noodles until they broke apart like mush. I came home from school with a spelling test folded in my pocket, 98% circled in red. I was proud of that number because my father liked numbers. They made sense to him. He worked in accounting, believed feelings were weaknesses, that numbers could fix everything. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. No TV, no radio, no clatter from the kitchen. My suitcase was sitting by the door. I didn't own a suitcase, not really, just an old blue duffel bag my dad used for work trips. My name was written on a CAG in my mother's handwriting. Neat, careful, final. My mother stood in the hallway holding my coat. My father didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the wall, like if he turned his head, he might crack, and they couldn't afford cracks, not that night. My mother said, "You can't stay here anymore." She didn't raise her voice, didn't cry, didn't explain. I asked what I did wrong because that's what children do. They assume fault is theirs. My father finally spoke and said, "We can't do this anymore, Evelyn. You make things difficult." I didn't know what that meant. I was quiet. I did my homework. I stayed out of trouble. I didn't drink. I didn't steal. I didn't scream. But I asked questions, and I remembered things, and sometimes I told the truth, and apparently that was enough. My mother pushed the coat into my hands and told me I could go stay with a friend. She said it like it was temporary, like a sleepover, like a choice. But when I asked which friend, she said, any. And when I asked for how long, she said, until things settle. I asked for my birth certificate, my social security card. My father said, you won't need those where you're going. And that was the moment something in my chest went cold. They walked me to the door. My mother kissed my forehead like she used to when I was sick. My father opened the door, and the night air rushed in. And just like that, I was outside the door. The lock clicked. I stood there for a long time because I kept thinking they'd open it. They'd call me back, say it was a mistake, say they were scared or angry or confused. But the door stayed shut. I walked to my friend Laura's house, 3 blocks away. Her mom let me sleep on the couch, but by morning, my mother had already called around saying I ran away, saying I left a note, saying I didn't want to live by their rules, saying they were heartbroken, saying they didn't know where they went wrong. The police came to Laura's house, and when they saw me, alive, confused, asking why my parents said I ran, they told me family matters were complicated and drove me back to my street, not to my house, but to the edge of it, and told me to knock. The door didn't open. My parents had already filed paperwork, said I was unstable, said I'd threatened to leave before, said I was a habitual liar. And when adults say those things about a child, second, I considered turning around, pretending I never got the letter. But I didn't, because 12-year-old Evelyn didn't get to walk away, and 42-year-old Evelyn wouldn't either. I pushed the door open. My father was sitting in a wheelchair, staring at the window, his hair thin, gray, his posture bent like gravity had finally claimed him. My mother lay in a hospital bed, eyes half closed, her mouth slightly open. The woman who once pressed my coat into my hands without explanation now needed help lifting a glass of water. Neither of them noticed me at first, and that hurt more than I expected, because some small part of me had imagined shock, recognition, guilt, something dramatic, something validating. But I was just another stranger entering their room until my mother turned her head and her eyes met mine, and I watched confusion turn to recognition, turn to something like fear. Her lips moved, and she whispered, "Evelyn." My father turned slowly, squinted, leaned forward, and said, "That's not funny, Margaret. Don't play games." But when I spoke, when I said, "It's me," he went quiet, completely quiet. The nurse explained their conditions: strokes, dementia, early onset cognitive decline. The medical language washed over me while I watched my parents struggle to place me into a version of reality that had no space for the lie they told 20 years ago. My mother started crying. She reached for my hand, said, "We thought you were gone." I almost laughed because the audacity of that sentence could have shattered glass. Thought I was gone? As if I evaporated? As if I chose disappearance? As if abandonment was a weather event and not a decision? My father finally spoke, his voice shaky, said, "You shouldn't be here." And I replied calmly, "The court says I should." And that was the first time in my life the law stood between me and their version of truth. Over the next few weeks, I learned everything they never expected me to learn. They'd told everyone I ran away, yes, but they'd also told people later that I died. Drugs, accident, overdose. Stories change depending on the audience because lies are flexible that way. I learned they never reported me missing officially, never searched, never hired a private investigator, never knocked on shelters or schools or hospitals, because to do that would mean admitting they let me go. And the court documents revealed something else, something colder. When I was 13, they'd accessed a small trust fund left to me by my grandmother, money intended for education, care, future, and they drained it, citing emergency family expenses. And because I was a minor without representation, no one stopped them. That money paid for renovations, vacations, a second car, while I slept in shelters wondering if I mattered to anyone. The Guardian process forced transparency: medical histories, financial disclosures, property records, and with every page I read, the betrayal sharpened. Not emotionally, but clinically, like a diagnosis finally confirmed. My parents were not confused, not overwhelmed, not victims of circumstance. They were intentional. And now they were vulnerable. My mother begged me to visit more often. My father oscillated between anger and denial. Sometimes he'd say, "You left us." Sometimes he'd say, "We did what was best." Sometimes he wouldn't recognize me at all. And through it all, I remained composed, professional, documenting decisions, signing forms, approving care, because that's what a guardian does. But inside, something shifted. Not toward revenge, not toward forgiveness, but toward control. For the first time, I had authority, not power over them, but power over the narrative. The truth was finally written down in legal language, not whispered, not dismissed, not ignored. And when extended family started calling, when cousins I hadn't heard from in decades suddenly wanted updates, suddenly wanted involvement, suddenly wanted opinions, I told them the truth, calmly, clearly, with documentation attached. And the silence that followed was louder than any apology, because once the lie collapsed, there was nothing left to stand on except guilt and denial. And neither of those age well. And just when I thought the story had reached its peak, the court called me in again, because there was a complication. Something uncovered in the financial review. Something tied to why I was appointed specifically and not randomly. And as I sat in that courtroom, listening to a judge flip through pages, I realized this wasn't just about care, it was about accountability. And what came next would force my parents to face consequences they never imagined when they closed that door 20 years ago. The judge didn't look at me when he started speaking. He looked down at the file, like he'd already seen too much, like the paper itself carried weight. And when he finally raised his eyes, they weren't cold, they were careful, which somehow felt worse because careful meant deliberate, and deliberate meant this wasn't accidental. This wasn't a clerical error. This wasn't just fate having a dark sense of humor. He said, Miss Carter, during the financial review tied to the guardianship assignment, irregularities were discovered connected to the trust established in your name when you were a minor. And the room went quiet, in that way courtrooms do, where even breathing feels loud. My parents sat behind me, my mother in her wheelchair, clutching a tissue, my father rigid, his jaw clenched as if holding the past in place by force. The judge continued, Withdrawals, unauthorized use, misrepresentation of beneficiary status, and falsified statements regarding your whereabouts. My mother started shaking. She whispered, Thomas, not now, not like this. And my father said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The lie they'd lived in for 20 years didn't just crack, it collapsed all at once under fluorescent lights and recorded audio and legal precedent. The judge explained that the court had reason to believe the abandonment and the narrative that followed were not just moral failures, but strategic ones, designed to access funds, avoid scrutiny, and erase responsibility. And because I was now legally tied to their care, the conflict of interest triggered a deeper review, which meant this guardianship was never just about medical decisions. It was about uncovering a truth that had been buried intentionally. And I felt something then. Not anger, not satisfaction, but a strange calm, like the moment after a storm when the air is still and everything damaged is finally visible. The judge asked if I wished to continue as guardian, given the circumstances, and for the first time since I was 12, the choice was truly mine. I stood up, my legs steady, my voice even, and said, Yes, I will continue. And a murmur rippled through the room, because people expect abandonment to repeat itself. They expect hurt people to walk away or retaliate. But I wasn't there to disappear again, and I wasn't there to punish. I was there to finish what they started by walking away with the truth intact. The investigation moved quickly. Records were subpoenaed, statements taken, former neighbors contacted, teachers, social workers, even the officer who once told me family matters were complicated. And through it all, the story aligned. My parents had planned it, not in a dramatic criminal mastermind way, but in the quiet, selfish way ordinary people do when they choose convenience over conscience. They believed I'd fade into the system, that time would blur details, that no one would look too closely. And they were almost right, because for 2 decades, no one did. Except the law, eventually, because paper remembers what people try to forget. The court ordered restitution from remaining assets, not to me directly, but to a foundation supporting children aging out of foster care, because the judge said, sometimes justice isn't about repayment, it's about redirection. And my parents lost their house, their savings, their ability to control the narrative. They were transferred to a state facility, modest, clean, impersonal. And when my mother asked me through tears if this was revenge, I told her, no, this is resolution. Revenge would have been easy. Disappearing again would have been easier. But standing here, letting the truth exist, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My father deteriorated quickly. Without his stories to shield him, he shrank into silence. And one afternoon, he looked at me clearly, really clearly, and said, I'm sorry. And I believed him. Not because the words fixed anything, but because for the first time, they weren't followed by justification. My mother lived longer. She asked me once why I didn't hate her, and I told her I did once, but hate is heavy, and I carried enough as a child. I wasn't carrying it into old age. I attended no funerals, accepted no inheritance, gave no eulogies, because closure doesn't always look like ceremony. Sometimes it looks like walking out of a building into sunlight, knowing the truth is documented, archived, undeniable. And when people ask me now about family, about forgiveness, about destiny, I tell them this. I didn't run away. I was left behind, and I survived long enough to be seen. And sometimes the most powerful ending isn't reconciliation, it's recognition, because the child they erased grew up, became undeniable, and held the door open, not to let them back in, but to finally walk through it herself, whole, accounted for, and no longer invisible. After the court proceedings ended, people assumed the story was over, that the truth had been exposed, consequences delivered, and everyone neatly placed into moral boxes. But life doesn't end cleanly like that, especially not when abandonment rewires you at 12 years old and follows you into every decision you make as an adult. Because even after my parents were removed, even after the restitution order, even after the files were sealed and archived, I remained their guardian, on paper and in practice, which meant phone calls at odd hours, decisions about medication, consent forms, end-of-life discussions, and the quiet, heavy responsibility of being the person listed when no one else wanted their names attached anymore. And that irony wasn't lost on me, because the same people who once whispered about me running away now whispered about how noble I was for staying involved. And I learned something important then. Reputation is elastic. It stretches to fit whatever story is easiest for the speaker, and I stopped caring about correcting it. I visited my mother less frequently as her condition declined, not out of cruelty, but because proximity reopened wounds that didn't need reopening. She would sometimes mistake me for her sister, sometimes for a nurse, sometimes for a stranger, and sometimes, in rare, lucid moments, she'd look straight at me and say, "You were a good girl." And I would nod, because arguing with the past is pointless when it's already written down in ink and court transcripts. My father passed quietly one night. No drama, no final confession, no cinematic closure, just a nurse's call and a time of death. And when I signed the paperwork, I felt lighter. Not relieved, not happy, just lighter. Like a weight I didn't realize I was still holding had finally been set down. My mother followed months later, and with her passing, the guardianship officially ended. The court sent a final notice thanking me for my service, as if caring for the people who abandoned you is a job you clock in and out of. And maybe it is, because after that letter, I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and cried for the first time. Not for them, but for the girl who stood on a porch with a duffel bag, waiting for a door to reopen, because she deserved someone to choose her back then, and no one did, except the woman she became. I donated the last of the required funds, spoke once at a foster care conference, anonymously, and declined interviews because my story wasn't meant to be consumed. It was meant to be survived. And years later, when I cast my childhood street, I don't slow down anymore. I don't look at the house. I don't imagine alternate endings, because the ending already happened. It just took 20 years to arrive. My parents abandoned me and told everyone I ran away. But the truth waited patiently, and when it finally caught up, it didn't need shouting, it didn't need revenge, it just needed one thing: time. Because time turns children into witnesses, paperwork into proof, and silence into the loudest confession of all. And if you're listening to this wondering what I'd say to my 12-year-old self now, I'd tell her this: you didn't disappear. They tried to erase you and failed. And sometimes the greatest justice isn't being loved by those who hurt you. It's living long enough to be undeniable and walking forward without needing their permission ever again.